Tēnā koutou katoa. Welcome back to the next workshop of the Science and Resilience Committee, the Otago Regional Council. We have a workshop this afternoon on river management. Up the front of the room, I see we have Tom Dyer, Brett Patterson, John Luke Pyon and Nate Anderson, who will be taking us through this. This is a public workshop. It's not being live streamed, but the recording will be presented soon. I see online we also have Kirsten Pivot, and we might have some councillors turning up, but not yet. We do have a great deal to get through in this workshop. Thank you to the staff who put this together. We'll hand over to the presentation shortly. There will be natural breaks in the presentation that we will come to for questioning. And we do have an hour and a half allocated for this. And as I say, there is plenty to get through. So handing over to Tom to start with.
Thank you and good afternoon, everyone. So I'll just make some quick introductions. Online we've got Kirsten Pivot. She's been working on getting this global consent for Otago Regional Council's River Engineering team. I've got our engineering manager on my right, Brett Patterson, our natural hazards manager, John Luke Pyon, and one of our technical experts in the river engineering space, Nathan Anderson as well. So just want to quickly run through the purpose of the workshop today. So we've had a request for a bit of information and recently received our global consent for river management works. Includes a range of different activities that we undertake to ensure that rivers are able to convey flows and not present either property or undue property or life risk to our communities. So that consent was received in May this year. Since then we've been working on applying to our future years of works. So now is the right time to come back to the committee and share it, and a workshop provides the opportunity to ask a range of questions. But importantly, the consent needs to be taken in context. So we're just going to work through a bit of what it is we do, why we do it, how that's structured, and then some of the details of the consent, so that hopefully all flows through and makes sense. So with that, I'll turn over to Nathan. I'll turn back on slide on the screen shortly, and he'll run you through some of the practices we undertake.
Thanks, Tom. And I just note for councillors, this presentation is also in Diligent in the Resource Centre under Council Resources.
Thank you for having me again. Just trying to get the slideshow to work. Okay, so what I'm going to talk about a little bit is more of a leadway into the discussion to follow. I guess it's really to set the stage of the type of things we like to think about when we're talking about rivers. I think really what it comes down to is, we all have experience with rivers. We all have been on rivers, and we think we have a good understanding of what they are and how they work based on our experience. But there's, if there's one message to come away with, is rivers are really complex. There are a lot of different kinds of rivers, and it's, any set of conditions, be it slope, flow, amount of sediment, they all really shape how a river forms and how a river functions. So they're very, very complex systems. I think we all get the general idea of what happens of the hydraulics of a river, and it's far more complicated, obviously, than we can get into in a session. But the gist of it is that the water on the outside of a bend is generally going to be flowing faster than water on the inside of the bend, and this results in a system where we see erosion due to the faster water on the outside and deposition on the inside. And over time, that results in a changing system. We have a a stream that, or a river that'll start out relatively straight when it's younger, and over time, meanders get wider and longer. And eventually, those meanders will cut themselves off and make side channels or oxbow lakes. But I think there needs to be a real distinction with rivers between what we call an active system and a stable system. Any river or stream that has water in it is going to be an active system. I mean, rivers, they all go through this process where they naturally change and they evolve over time. Whereas a stable system, some rivers are stable naturally, and some rivers are unstable, or instability will result in response to an action. It might be a landslide, it might be a large flood, it might be removing of material through excavation. So all of these disturbances will cause instabilities that will ripple through the system. So they can be, you can have an active river that's stable and then it becomes unstable. When we get into talking about gravel removal and extraction, we often get into these terms, aggregation and degradation, and we think we really know what those are. So aggregation and degradation often result from an instability. It's not necessarily something that's active in or it happens in an active system. It can, but we tend to think of these things that happen due to an instability, and aggregation is really what an average rise of the bed level, and degradation is an average drop of the bed level. But when we go back to our active river system, we have the channel moving laterally back and forth. We have both going on simultaneously, and this is not the same as aggregation and degradation. We have cutting in on one side and degradation going in, or we have sediment depositing on the other, but the average bed is staying the same during this process. I just put a couple slides up, or sample photos examples where you can see the natural river channel, the river process in action. This photo was taken as an aerial on the Tyree, and you can see where I highlighted in yellow where we have active deposition on the inside of the beds and erosion on the outside of the beds. This is a relatively stable system. Here's another one. This is a much further in the channel evolution. I believe I took this one from the Mississippi River, where you can really see the how the channel has evolved over time and the different flow paths that it's taken as time has progressed. We see all of the different oxbows and scars on the landscape. Part of the natural process. But of course, human activity presents a whole number of challenges to a natural river system. This photo is on the Clutha, and those pink lines that you see are flood banks. So you can see that if you think about how the channel will migrate laterally, or you see some of the deep meanders over on the right side of the screen, you can think about the challenges that a system like this or structures like this would really present when it comes to river management. We really confine the river to a very narrow range, and then we're left with the task of managing that based on the choices that were made. Another area that really presents challenges are bridges. We have channels that are active or maybe unstable, and it wants to move, and we've combined it to go under this bridge at this one exact spot, and that makes it really difficult. And then by doing that, the sequence of events is, the channel is moving, we need to do something, so we go in, put in armored solutions to try to keep it where it is, and that results in additional instability that will work its way through the system. So when we talk about gravel extraction and what that does, what that does is it results in a disturbance or an imbalance. And anytime we do that, there's going to be some sort of response from the river. And that may be good, it may be bad. We just have to understand really what it is. So I just drew up a couple sketches here, just of hypothetical situations. I guess the idea here is to let your imagination flow. But common situations where we have identified gravel deposits on the inside of a river bend and somebody wants to come on and remove that or extract that for benefit. And if it's done wrong, what we've seen and what we have seen is all of that energy, all of that disturbance, it all has to go somewhere. And if it's done wrong, we can end up with serious erosion further downstream. And that'll again, you know, as the channel goes through its natural process, will continue to have that ripple effect through the system, disrupting people's properties and you know, expensive infrastructure like bridges and stop banks. Here's another hypothetical situation I just roughly sketched up. It's more of a plan and profile type of view. So if you're looking down on a river and it's, you know, flowing and going to extract some material and that area is shown in red. Well, the water is going to follow that new path that we created, that path, that deeper area where it was excavated. And again, that's going to result in a disturbance in the system. And that disturbance, you can imagine we're going to have, you know, it's like a nick point in the river where you'll have degradation of the bank and that'll move further upstream. On this photo, it's this isn't a result of gravel attraction, but it is a similar kind of disturbance of what I was just talking about, where something happened further downstream, and that disturbance is trying to reach new stability, and it worked its way upstream to points where it can no longer move because there's infrastructure. So I think this is a really clear example of the type of things where, you know, something happened. You know, we don't necessarily know what it was, but we can see that when these things happen, we get this ripple effect that works its way through. So when we think about these type of things, I think it's really worth considering, you know, where are these extractions going to occur? How deep? How much? How is it going to be staged? How is it going to be sequenced? What kind of sediment do we have? Is the system naturally aggregating or degrading? And, you know, we have places where some of these things may be beneficial. I'm not, you know, suggesting by any means that gravel shouldn't be extracted, because there are some places where it could certainly be beneficial to the system. So going back to the flood bank scenario where we've confined the river to a very narrow stretch, if that's going to be maintained, something is going to have to be done. But what it is, to what extent, we really need to understand so that we don't introduce a problem that is going to be expensive to fix later on. And with the tools we have today, it's not really that difficult to analyze these situations like where it used to be. We have some really great software tools now that allow us to look at what these effects of removals or any kind of excavation or river changes would be. And so, you know, I just put a somewhat random photo of a spot on the Clutha that, you know, you can see the areas in red where we have very, very high shear stress on the bed. And so you can look at this photo and you can pretty much see where you would expect to find failures. And indeed we have. So we have a few keys to the success of this. You know, some places it's going to be necessary. So we really need to focus on where it's needed and defining our limits and knowing our hydraulics. And then following up, of course, following up with monitoring. So again, this was just to really kind of set the stage, you know, how we look at rivers from a natural process and the things that, from a hydraulic perspective, we want to know anytime we're going to do some disturbance to a river. So I guess we can take a break now to ask any questions on this part.
Yeah, so I guess just to wrap up that section, summary is it's complex, river management's complex, and at the moment a lot of our rivers we're managing with not, I wouldn't say passively, but rather than taking huge volumes of gravel out of systems, we've been focusing on alignment and small adjustments to manage the balance that Nathan's just talked you through. But I guess with that, now is a decent spot to take some general questions on that, on the content that Nathan's just presented.
Thanks, Tom, and look, welcome councillors to Metham and Gary Kelleher who are online. So yes, does anyone have questions on this at this stage?
Yeah.
Gary.
Really interesting. And Tom, I'd just probably couch it with that. I think we are probably heading into a stage where we are starting to manage rivers, but I would think from prior to you getting here, we just haven't been, certainly in my patch, there are rivers that we haven't been actually doing the work on. So I think we're in catch-up mode, but I really appreciate the opportunity to get an understanding. And if we look at just a couple of things that you've said on number 6, the shape of that river, and you said that it will develop from a young river going straight to an oxbow one out at the end. Would that surely not also be dependent on the drop of the river, as in the slope of the river? So we look at the Wainaka River, which I think is, from my understanding, the Wainaka River has got the greatest fall in New Zealand from the top to the bottom over a short distance. So that would not necessarily go to Oxbow.
The Baldwin Street of rivers, is it?
It is, I think, yeah.
Oh, yeah, yes, that is absolutely correct, and
Yeah.
and this is, it was just to represent
Cool.
a general type of thing, but with all the different varieties of rivers, some will never get to this.
Yeah,
On
yeah.
the stage.
I think just add to that too, you're right, 100%. What we find is that most of the areas where there's either public interest or a requirement for us to manage rivers and adjust them to fit within a confine or a constraint or a flow regime. Typically, we're working on preventing this type of pattern from occurring. So we're normally stopping it from moving from a B category on that diagram to a C,
Yeah.
or C to a D.
Right.
That's
Cool.
a lot of the type of work we end up doing.
Yeah, yeah. And then just going to 13, and that's probably quite a pertinent wee picture. I just wondered with the date of that picture, because it's sorry, Tom.
You know this one well, mate.
And look, and you don't panic about that one, because on the 14th and on 14 and 15, you were showing one of the things you said, that if you get it wrong, consequences are could be quite dramatic. But then later on, you said about we now have the tools to ensure or to limit that. So we're pretty confident that we've got good tools to make the right decisions.
Yes, we have some the really outstanding software. The ability of the software has really just progressed in the last 10 years to the point where we can really model many things that we could never have dreamed about even 20 years ago.
Yeah, and then on 17 and 18, we went into your hypothetical situations of gravel extraction, and then that causing, because you've gone below level. Would that necessarily happen if you're actually going below, only if you're going below the natural bed of the river? So if we're extracting to what we deem to be the natural bed of the river, I'm just thinking of the mappings that we've done on the Kakanui and the likes. So if we're only going to so we've had we've had a flush come through, build up an island somewhere, and we go and extract it. But if we don't extract it below the natural bed of the river, we shouldn't have that issue.
I think that if there's one takeaway, is the answer every time is going to be, it's going to depend. And we really would need to look at it on a case by case basis. It's hard to say on any one particular thing.
Yeah,
You're right.
Yeah.
And that sensitive removal of of any material with with thought to ensuring that that profile change is minimised and all that sort of thing is going to help to balance and ensure that the effects of that activity aren't as significant as they might be.
And look, I say that with because by many gravel extraction is painted as something quite evil on a river, but done right. And I just want to make sure that whatever we're doing in gravel extraction is done the correct way, and making sure those balances are in place. And it's very then, if that's our mantra for doing it, it's easier for me to get that through to the public, saying, well, that's why we're doing those specific things.
Yeah, and I think that was you hit on the point. It's all about understanding what you're going to do when you do it.
Thank you. I'll take a break.
Okay, thanks. We've got Andrew and then Gary.
Thanks, Alan. Just thinking about the impact of the freshwater reforms from 217 to 223, and I suppose it comes back to your comment, Tom, you used the word passive approach, I think. Yeah. So how much influence did those freshwater reforms have on adopting a passive approach in that period through to now, or is the approach something that has been inherited along the way prior to 217?
No, I think the short answer is not a whole lot. Like those reforms have probably impacted how you undertake the works, but not necessarily what you do and why. A lot of when I talked about that passive approach, Jean-Luc will take us through some slides shortly, which I think will answer that in terms of our river management plans and the things that they cover off. And so when you're looking at a river that's got a river management plan that provides us with a steer on the types of work that will be required or the limits that we're working within, and that then steers you to a more passive or more aggressive approach. The other thing is budget constraints and resources and that sort of thing. Like the rivers team is much bigger than it used to be and much more well funded. So we're able to undertake a lot more work from in terms of those constraints, but at the same time, we're still not talking about mass realignments and huge gravel extraction to be able to manage within the constraints that are set out in those river management plans.
And the other question is just following on from Kevin and Nat mentioned Kevin mentioned taking the gravel down to the level of the river, which is normally what you normally can only, you've got to leave 300 mil or whatever it might be within the river. Does that not help to mitigate a process? Well, does that not help to ensure that the natural process would be more likely than not follow the previous process? In other words, the gravel would mound up again in that same spot. But I think, Nate, you said it could go either way depending on flows and God knows whatever else. So does the modelling help to minimise the so-called unpredictability of nature, I suppose? That's the key, is it?
It is. It helps us understand what the response is going to be.
Thank you.
Wow.
All right, thank you, Gary. And then I think we better return to the presentation. Gary.
Okay, thank you. I know I am having technological problems too, but I just because we've paused for questions, I just wanted to, I suppose, ask or pass on that what I've observed and what I certainly hear from the contractors in my area is that we've come from certainly a catchment board evolved into earlier ORC, where river management was far more managed, it was more aggressive, but we've evolved to a point of far more passiveness, less work done, and the works that are done are often left, the contractors are left scratching their heads as to why are we doing so little when the job needs to be more extensive and we would actually get a better job done and we won't be back to it quite so soon. And the examples of the sketches put up, there's no-brainer type stuff there, and those that manage water and understand this stuff, that's just obvious. It's almost like trying to portray what would be a worst case scenario. But is it a point where our passiveness has arrived us at a point where actually when we do have to do work, we're either not doing enough or it is becoming too costly that we will never actually do enough at those times and we'll be back at it more often? Because I hear that regularly.
Yeah, I think it's a good question and part fair feedback. So if you think back over a long period of time, I'm sure there's been big swings in approaches to managing certain rivers, certain reaches of river, and a lot of it will come down to trial and error. Nate talked about the tools that we have now and how we approach things now in terms of thinking before we act and do. In the past, there would have been a lot of judgment and then monitoring to determine the impact of a change. And saying that, more recently, as I said before, we have a team that's able to be across the river network more effectively because we've got more hours in the day, more members of the team, therefore more hours in the day to be able to do that. And we have a greater set of tools to be able to undertake that. So if you think about recent history, we are far more ably set up now to make good decisions going forward. And in terms of our program for the coming year, that is quite a big step up on what we did last year and the year before. And so while I can't answer your question directly, I think there's a range of decisions and a range of constraints that factor into each river management decision that's made on each day. But we are moving into a phase now where we are adequately funded and adequately able to be able to undertake works at a level that might be more in line with what you're expecting.
Right. Okay, thank you. Look, I think in view of our time, we'd better carry on with the presentation. Thanks so far for your questions and comments, everyone.
So I've got a series of slides describing river morphology and riparian management plan that we've been developing ranging from 2015 to 2019 or 18. Just to explain 2 words on that slide, morphology means river shape and riparian mean close to a river. So those plans really look at shapes of rivers and activities and principles to guide decision making around land that is adjoining rivers. So we put those plans together, recognizing the complexity that Nate has presented to you in terms of natural processes, but also recognizing the different interaction that people and land use can have near a river, and recognizing the different values, recreational values, cultural values, and ecological values. So we've done them in sections of river catchments where we had known issues or hotspots. So we've got those documents available for the Kakanui River, Pomahaka, Strestari, Waihimo, and Wainakarura. And all the reports are available online for anyone to access. You've got on the screen the purpose and how they've been developed, but the key message here is those documents have been developed with the community input. So we had a lot of engagement with community, with different groups that interact with the river. And my last slide will be summarizing those groups. Basically what they set common principles around managing rivers, and those principles are around ensuring a sustainable river management, giving enough information for people to plan ahead, understand how the river system could change in the future, and maintain and enhance the natural environment. But they also provide some data set that are very useful for people having some interaction with the river, and I'm going to explain that in my next slide. But the other point here to note is those are not statutory documents. They are here to inform communities, to inform groups, fish and game, DOC, ORC planning when we deal with rivers and river management. And they are focusing on river processes erosion and flooding, and they're not really focusing too much on water quality, for example. Those are dead by other documents. I've got on the screen here an example of one of the key data set that is provided in those documents. And that's a combination of that cross-section and also the example of maps we have on the right-hand side. This is showing what the strategy defined as river fairway, which is basically the riverbed, and river corridor, which is the riverbed plus a buffer where we think the river will evolve in time. And the way this can be used by people having, for example, land close to a river is to guide them around what they can expect the river front to do in the future and for them to adapt their activities accordingly. So for example, if you have land outside of the green line or outside of the corridor, you can have normal farming activities. You are less likely to be affected by river changes. If you have activities, asset, infrastructure within the river corridor and the fairway, you can still have normal farming activity, but the flood risk or the erosion risk increases. And if you are in the fairway, that's a very dynamic part of the river. And one of the purposes of the strategy is to highlight that this part of the river should be maintained and maintained open for water to flow. So this information was done based on physical characteristics of the river, and those maps are all available to the public through the strategy. The other thing that the strategy has been also looking at is areas where gravel has been accumulating and could be removed, or areas the other way around where gravel is lacking and no more extraction is suggested there. This idea is, it's a lot of information, but basically there are the key consideration in terms of to consider when river management or gravel extraction is undertaken, and that really a reflection of Nate's description of river processes and making sure we're not adversely affecting areas downstream or upstream of the extraction area. And as I mentioned before, that's a summary of the different groups that been engaged with when we were developing the different plans.
And are there questions or comments at this stage? Kate and then Kevin.
Thank you. And I concur, I have in fact participated in some of those discussions. And the key of my frustrations for this whole process, and I just want to articulate, am I correct in believing almost all of those reports had a paragraph in them, and referenced several times, along the line that ORC will investigate the possibilities, benefits and legality of a consent held by the ORC to allow for the management of gravel extraction and river management activities in the whichever river. ORC will aim to use the consent to enable landholders to achieve river management objectives, i.e. to help mitigate bank erosion, scarring or excessive gravel accumulation. And that is all in the context of as long as it meets all of those criteria. Now, I think that's definitely one from the Pomahaka. I've found one in the Taieri, which was very similar. I've read it, and I think all of those statements, it suggests, and we have used that we will be doing that. And that, am I correct?
About this, the fact that it's in strategy.
Yes, yeah, I thank you.
Yep, the wording's there.
Okay, Kate. Right, Kevin.
Oh, yeah, so if we go back to page 27, just on your data set and the diagram, which is pretty damn cool. And I am reasonably familiar with the map on the right-hand side of the Kakanui. So what would my, just to check that I've got it right, Jean-Luc, is that you're trying to keep the fairway clear so the water has access to flow down the fairway. And that if you're doing activities outside of the corridor, you should be able to carry on your general activities.
It's it's more you should be aware of the fact that the river could move from the fairway. So the fairway could be moving into the corridor.
Yep.
So you should be aware of that and adapt your activity accordingly.
Right, so I can tell you where we're managing the fairway and the corridor on the Leith, which is quite simple. There's a great big concrete barrier that we put up and managing it. But so in that map, where can I assume, or where should ORC be managing the river to as a general rule? You know, what should we be? Is all the people around or any river, and so we've drawn those lines, where should we be managing the river to?
It will depend, but in general, it'd be focusing on the fairway.
Yeah. So ensuring probably that it's not going to go out over into the corridor as a general. Yeah, look, it's just trying to meet community expectations, because if you look on the Kakanui one, we are now seeing where the river fairway has gone outside both those lines, and we've never actually done anything to manage it.
Yeah.
So that's gone, but I'm just saying from now, if we're going to draw these maps up here and we're saying this is how we're managing and this is why we're drawing it, where as the river management team should we be looking at to protect people's land? I thought that's our responsibility. So where should we be? Where should our be limits be?
The
Subject to natural disaster, right? Subject to a bloody big earthquake, and we can't do anything about that. But
I've got just a copy of the Kakanui strategy, for example, on that diagram. Has a note saying the strategy provides a process for landowners, stakeholders to request river management work to be undertaken to maintain or protect these boundaries, so the fairway and the corridor.
yeah,
And to coordinate the activity of different agencies to enhance the river corridor. So what the strategy is saying is basically we need to maintain the boundaries where they are, so the
Yep.
fairway and the corridor.
Yep.
The fairway itself could move into the
Yeah.
corridor. That's why we've got a corridor, that buffer basically.
Yeah,
We're saying
yeah.
fairway that's naturally where the fairway will go.
So we should be looking with the expectation of a person decided is I keep out of that corridor and the fairway. To ensure that we give the river that space, but the river managers should be looking after that space.
Yeah, should be aiming.
You know, like and I'm not saying if we have an earthquake, well, I can't, change the weather to Canterbury around, but
Yeah, broadly speaking, you're right.
thank you. Yeah.
Thank you, Gary.
Thank you. Just on the two slides after that one, I think, which we dived across really quickly. Yes, those two. The first one, well, I saw that when I read the presentation, and then this one, but the first one, every part of that is about minimization of the activity as opposed to actually fronting what might need to be done. And then the second part of it, if you couple that to that, is that of all those organisations that are shown there, I don't see the contractors, the knowledgeable people out there, whether it's the local landowners, it's the people who have done this for years, involved there. Maybe they have been and they've been missed off off one of those diagrams, but every part of it seems to be a diminishment, and I think that may be part of our problem. That's certainly the problem the community holds.
So I think those groups are broadly grouped up into the community brackets, but take your point that probably could have been a bit more breakdown, and certainly not the intent to minimise, although I could see how you read it that way.
Okay, thank you.
Thanks, Gretchen, and then we'll return to the presentation.
I was just wanting to go back to Councillor Malcolm's question there about being clear about what we're offering the community, I suppose, and that diagram of the river and the boundaries there, and if somebody's developed up to the edge there, that we would protect their private property, and we got to the point where we would, I think. But I'm just wanting to test that actually yeah, sometimes would it always be possible to do that? And also, in the instance that it has impacted somebody's property and the fact that we have to rate the beneficiary essentially, and there isn't an existing scheme or something, then we probably would end up charging that particular landowner as well. And then we get into a bit of a conversation about whose right it is to say that we're gonna keep the river in those lines.
Yeah, so I've got quite a short answer to that
Yeah.
before. But the keywords I was using were aim to, and, you know, keeping qualified as safe, but reference to under normal conditions, et cetera. And I think those are things that all factor into that. But under normal conditions, year in, year out, we would attempt to manage within those corridors. But obviously, a river's a river, and in some cases able to do things that
That's weird things.
we're not necessarily able to adjust significantly, and there are going to have to be, and will always have to be, conversations with landowners around how a river's behaving and the viability of adjusting that over time. But it's a matter of, one, making those judgments, and two, having those conversations regularly.
Thanks. I think if we return
Thanks,
to the
Richard.
presentation now, thanks.
So I'm just going to pop through a few slides that just outlines sort of where engineering fits within the work in the puzzle. Talk a wee bit about how our global consent process that went through, and talk a wee bit how our work programs linked into our global consent. So this slide is just a snapshot of our long-term plan, and just highlights where engineering's activities sit within managing our rivers. And the bullet points in that slide are the kind of salient points. So that just provides the background, or I suppose the framework from which we do our work within. Where engineering fits in terms of river management, so we've got our natural hazards colleagues that are taking the long view in terms of the strategy and the management plans. They're getting their input from the community through that process, so through the community submissions and formal engagement, I suppose you'd say, from that. So engineering looks to those strategies and looks to implement them physically in the environment. Our inputs from the community are somewhat more direct and probably less formal through our liaison groups, stakeholders, through consent process, and directly communicating with the community and landowners. This slide just outlines where we sit within the legislation framework. There's a number of pieces of legislation that influence how we go about our work, and provides some opportunities and some barriers to how we interact with our rivers and how we interact with the environment. So looking at how we go about our work within the regulatory framework, a lot of our work is undertaken under permitted activities. So a lot of our routine work, our spraying and vegetation control, largely undertaken within permitted activity rules. Where we can operate under our permitted activity rules, we need a consent. So we have our global consent in place, which enables a large number of our, generally speaking, business as usual activities. So our maintenance type activities, which include, with the new global consent, does include some ability for extraction, includes ability to move gravel around in rivers, enables tree work and other pieces of work as well. But there are limitations to our global consent. We need to do a larger piece of work that is going to have impact over a fairly significant stretch of waterway. We will need to apply for and gain a specific consent for that work. We've got a number of examples where we do the river already. The Silver Stream is probably the most recent example. Most of our capital works programs require specific consent. Contour Channel, we do hold some other consents. We've got one in the Shotover and Buckleburn as well, where we can use those consents to do reasonably large scale work. So the global consent. So
You
previous
carry on, sorry, Brent, do carry on, sorry, I shouldn't have interrupted.
I can stop there for questions if you like.
No, I think this next section is about the more detail about the recent global consent, so let's carry on.
Our previous global consent expired in 2021. We continue to rely on that consent until June this year when our new consent came in place. We could continue to rely on that consent because we had a consent application lodged within the required time. There are quite a number of other entities that hold global consents. NVTA holds quite a permissive consent to do work around their bridge structures and things like that. TAs also hold consents generally related to be able to do work around their structures to protect their works. Our new global consent is actually 3 consents. So we have a land use consent, we have a discharge consent, and we have a water consent. Land use consent is for altering and disturbing the bed of rivers. Discharge allows to discharge contaminants largely when we're doing that, sort of discharge. And we have a water consent that allows us to dam and divert where we need to. The timeline for the global consent, like I said, started back in February 2021. The original application was lodged reasonably quickly largely for the intent of getting the application in so that we could continue to rely on the existing consent. From there was an RFI process from the Consent Authority, which requested quite a significant amount of information. So the slide on the screen, the blue sections of that slide are the actions of the applicant, being engineering, and the yellow sections of that slide are the requests and actions of the Consent Authority, working our way through the consent. I'm not going to go into too much detail of the RFI request because it was quite significant. The volume and extent of information required through the RFI process was quite large, quite extensive environmental management plans, quite some extensive effects assessments. So the next several slides covers those, which I will just pop through quite quickly. And if you do have any questions on later, we can perhaps come back to them. So we'll just skip through these quite quickly. Now, if you can pop down to say slide 45. One of the significant issues that we did come across was in relation to our drainage schemes and how we manage them within the consent. There's a different opinion and different pieces of guidance in terms of how drains are waterways or rivers or not waterways or rivers. This did become quite a sticky question within the process. There was a decision made to remove drains specifically from the global consent. So our drainage networks or our drainage schemes are not included within the global consent. This provides a bit of a background of some of the consultants' positions around that. The mapping, or had we continued to pursue, including the drainage schemes and drainage work within it, it would have been quite complex. The amount of mapping required and the restrictions that would have come with that made it such that it would have been very difficult to consent or possibly unconsent. Stop there for questions.
We can stop there for questions. I think it's appropriate.
Marcus, I'll just make a comment just on the nature of the questioning. The regulatory part of the process was undertaken in accordance as it should have been with the RMA. So this isn't, we don't have the staff here. Joe has some oversight and so do I, but we don't have the staff here to answer questions about how the consent was processed at our end. That's a different conversation if we want to have it. What I can say is the premise of processing applications is being able to understand clearly what the effects of any activity will be, and that is the challenge that exists with global consent. So it is, it is very complex and very difficult under the current resource management framework to process those, and that's what's played out as Brett showed through these various processes. But I just want to encourage, if there are questions about that part of the process, for us to take those offline, and myself and Joe are happy to have those conversations at another point and focus on the engineering outcome through this global consent.
And just before the next question, because I think this might answer a few of them. So the removal of drain cleaning from the consent was made, it was a judgment call that was made, but one of the fallbacks is that drain cleaning is actually a permitted activity under the current water plan as well. So our ability to still clean drains exists. It's not exactly what we would have hoped for through a consent, but we're still undertaking a drain cleaning program and still have been undertaking a drain cleaning program over the last few years, and we've got more work planned for this year, and that's just calculated as a permitted activity. There will be a couple of consents required where those drains do dip into that classification as a river, but for the most part, it's not a massive encumbrance.
And just to add to that, those areas are fairly discrete. So they're relatively short sections of drains where we will need to seek consent to do that work.
Thank you. Look, we will have some questions now. Kate, you're first.
Look, I get the RMA things. There were several times during that during the RFI request and response that answers were given that either didn't go back to the wider community or even to us. So we didn't understand that process. Because having said we will do something, we then didn't pursue that with the community. And I think we didn't include them as stakeholders. Would I be correct?
Look, I think the consent process was largely treated as an operational exercise, and that once we'd engaged with the consent authority on seeking that consent, we sought to resolve that as an operational task, and we'd be happy to take feedback on as to how we might approach that in the future. But I think that was the mindset and the approach.
So can I give a wee bit of context? I have stood round river banks with staff over the last 6 years, actually longer, because I've done it as a Dunedin City Councillor, someone in the transport sector looking at gravel extraction for roading as well. And so with TAs, with members of the community, consistent with and they were great meetings, they were really well. I don't agree with Gary's comments about participation in those. We set up a high expectation with people really concerned about the river in those, and we kept that story going at those meetings that I've been to, that we will get this consent that will help you do all of this good work. Yes, within limitations. And it seems to be somewhere along that path, we've operationalised things, we stopped telling people what was happening. I thought it was happening. And I really, I had high expectations. And so it's that disconnect where we don't report back. It's not the process, and so decisions made about the 50,000 or it not being even global. I'm not quite sure how that happened. Is it just to get it through because it was still a thing, or should we have stopped and said actually it'd be better to do it by river by river?
I think it's probably some of that we can't answer, just in terms of staff changes and all that sort of stuff that's occurred through the process. And I'll before answering with any certainty, I'll probably just reflect on that. I think it's a good question, something we can think about for next time around. I think some of those issues may be warranted, but some of them don't. It's just a matter of the context. Yeah, thank you for providing that feedback around those prior conversations.
Yeah, that's what's, we've let a lot of people down unwittingly. I totally understand that, but it's just, they've been hanging out.
And I think what I'm saying, I understand that, because I've had plenty of those conversations at various community meetings at long-term plan or wherever we've been around the place, is if people have a specific expectation from a previous conversation, then Tom and Brett are the people they should be engaging with directly. And that conversation, we are open to it. And if it isn't provided for in this consent, which it may or may not be, we still have the opportunity to put that into the programs, the annual work programs that Brett and his team are delivering now, and get the necessary approvals and get on with them. So certainly up for those, and I have them, and I know Tom and Brett and staff have them on a regular basis as well.
Thank you. Kevin?
Look, I think it is a question, but I've just got a real concern that this certainly isn't what I thought we were going to get from everything I've been told since 2021 that we were going to get. And Richard, I'm just really concerned about the additional pressures that this is going to bring upon our staff to get the job that I thought a global consent was going to fix, to get the job done. So that's certainly the perception.
So I will respond, because they've got a question in
Thank
there,
you.
which is, am I concerned about the same thing?
Yeah.
So I'm not, I have said around this table previously, while the global consent was still a priority, it is not going to deliver everything that people around this table expected it to deliver, because my experience is global consents never do, whether they're for tree pruning on roads or gravel extraction or whatever they might be for, they are limited in terms of the scope of them purely through the process that they need to follow to get to an outcome. The team have been well aware of that, and I'm comfortable that this won't put an unnecessary onus on them. If anything, through changes we get in national direction and other central government direction, it may still become easier without any further action from us. Given that the land and water plan changes won't be occurring, there might just be national direction changes. So appreciate that, Kevin, and that is, but I suppose my response is I don't think there's a disconnect for staff, because we were expecting it.
Yeah.
And so we will still have the resources available and the processes in place to be able to undertake the work that needs to happen.
So without, and I won't name a river, but if there was a river that was deemed to require a significant amount of, and this is around bridge protection, if there was a significant amount of gravel that exceeded the 50,000 cubic meters, that would be us that would get that consent, as opposed to making a contractor go through that consent.
Or TA.
Or a TA.
Yeah, depends on the purpose. So this slide here was designed to kind of articulate how we group things up.
Yeah.
That type of work would certainly fall in that reach specific consents line. And look, if we had a volume required for river management purposes, we go and seek consent to do that.
Yeah.
So if there's a volume of, say, take 100,000 cubes or something like that was required to come out for the purposes of river management, we go and seek that consent and get that underway, and then seek a contractor to undertake the work. If there was 100,000 cubes sitting there having no impact on the flow capacity of the river, and a contractor was keen to go get stuck into it, then we would expect them to undertake the consenting process.
Thank you.
Right, thank you. I think
Thanks, Richard. Thank you.
Oh, Lloyd.
I think I'll just kind of say that's probably very consistent with what I've just read in the Paul Harper book, that the consent at that time, global consent, was about mitigating excess gravel, not taking gravel that's not causing an issue.
No, absolutely. It's really limited.
We understand that.
But that's still one of the ways to live, is like 2016 away.
No, yeah, it was always within the context of.
Which is,
John Luke's,
which
yeah.
is probably how I understood the whole process was
Yeah.
proceeding along those lines. And I think, there's talk, like, I think then, I think it may be more effective to have a river to river type system going so that it's more freely available or recognised or accessible to people in the area. And often only, it's often only a handful of people that are really affected, but they need to know what's going on.
Yeah, I think the other thing that if you read through those plans more broadly, one of the themes is that there's not at a system level, those plans don't necessarily describe a huge excess of gravel. They talk about gravel starved reaches, they talk about gravel regulation breaches, but a general theme of not necessarily having a great deal of gravel. And so, for instance, the Kakanui River, we see erosion occurring at the estuary at the bottom end, largely or in part due to the volume of gravel because it's been getting down to that end point. And so one of the strategies that the team are employing at the moment is ensuring that gravel is able to move and keep moving down the system by removing vegetation or spraying off what would typically be a river, a braided riverbed that might be covered vegetation that's kind of stopping that gravel from moving at the moment. So those kind of things are all factoring into the thinking, but you do accept that that's sitting in those plans.
Thank you. Shall we carry on?
So this was just highlighting the costs are involved with obtaining these consents. I would say that the cost on the right one is already quite high. It doesn't include any staff time. It's really just our prime consultant cost. So the actual cost of acquiring consents would be significantly higher than that value. They are extremely intensive and quite costly. A lot of consultant input and a huge amount of staff time input into them as well.
We'll just carry on a bit longer, Kate.
So some of the key challenges during the consenting process, scope of works proposed. As Richard indicated earlier, global consent is notoriously difficult to actually nail down the work that you want to be doing within it. The ecological impacts that that's going to provide. A lot of stakeholder engagement. There is a slide further down that indicates the number of stakeholders that were involved in this particular consent and that we have to continue to engage with through this process. Discussed earlier the rivers versus drains issue and then habitat issues for various species. Along with this consent, there is quite an extensive environmental management plan, EMP. It was developed over quite a long period of time and forms a crucial part in demonstrating or developing how the consent needs to be implemented. We can adjust it over time where we need to. It does provide guidance on how we need to engage with our stakeholders. It provides guidance on how we need to go about putting our work programs together. In some ways is actually quite useful in terms of directing the Rivers team and how we go about our work. And in other ways provides a bit of restriction and work in those teams. So the limitations within the consent itself, there's limitations on how often we can intervene with our rivers. There's limitations on over what lengths we can intervene. And there's limitations on volumes that we can extract and such like as well. They vary depending on what area we're working in and what catchment we're in, what stream we're in. They are workable. And we need to, when we're putting our work programs together each season, we need to be quite mindful of these and build our work programs that align with them. More limitations on what lengths of river we can work within. Stakeholders. So I mentioned just earlier that there is quite an extensive list of stakeholders that we need to continue to engage with. We, as part of the consent, we need to build our work programs, communicate them to those stakeholders. They can get the opportunity to provide comment on those work programs. We need to meet with them to discuss those comments before we finalise our work programs. And then we need to, after we've done the work, report back on how that work went. There's an annual cycle and it will continue for the duration of the consent.
Can I just jump in on that slide, not as a stop now for questions, but this is the regulatory requirement for stakeholder interaction, completely separate to the ongoing interaction with the community and other interested parties in the gravel extraction program. So that is all happening as well, as a matter of course, and as per the plans that were up a few slides back that starts to show our annual work program. Sorry, Brent.
So there are a few challenges that come with the new consent. It does encourage a long-term view. And what that means for our team is that we need to take a long-term view of how.
But over 5 years.
But over 5 years. Yeah. It does require our stakeholders to be available to us when we provide them information and ask for feedback. And it requires a lot of effort from our Rivers team to engage with those stakeholders and work that process through. It doesn't provide for third parties to easily rely on the consent, but that doesn't mean that we can't work with those third parties in terms of how we can engage with them to undertake the works that they see. So specifically on gravel management, it does provide for mechanical extraction of gravel up to 50,000 cubic metres a year. We can only extract for a certain number of times within each catchment per year. And we can only do it over a certain length of river. Cannot be used for commercial gain for ORC. But that's not to say we can't work with our suppliers in terms of how that material can be reused.
So just to be clear, that means that we can't receive profit. As ORC, we can't receive profit for the extraction of gravel, but it doesn't preclude us from entering into a situation where, for instance, a contractor might extract gravel and take away and no money may change hands. So that's how we interpret that.
And it is limited to the rivers displayed on the slide as well. I might just take a wee break there for questions.
Can I just clarify that, Tom? Would that mean that someone could perhaps take away gravel, but at the same time be doing some river alignment as that gravel got taken away?
Yeah, potentially, if that was a part of the scope of work that we commissioned
Yes.
for the management of the river,
Yeah.
then yes. And what I'd expect is that if we're entering into appropriate commercial relationships, that would result in a lower cost for us or an offset of costs in terms of the contract.
Yeah.
Kate, did you have a question at this point too? You thought you did, I thought you did earlier. You might
Yeah.
not.
No, I think there's some doubt as to that commercial one in the wording. Only because it's not reflected in the recommending report and the actual condition is really narrow, but that's vote. Interesting to see the rivers listed like that. It's not in the appendix. The appendix actually has a map that says you can't use this map for legal purposes, which makes it really fraught. And I couldn't tell which rivers were in it, which is unfortunate because they're never named in that appendix. I'm going to say it now, which probably isn't the right time. because we've got regulatory stakeholders, the problem here is we haven't taken other stakeholders in that process. And nothing requires us only ever, and we certainly saw this over the third schedule part of the land and water plan. Nothing limits us from talking to other stakeholders at any time. And that is the second time we've done this. We haven't talked to the other parties. And most importantly in this are the community and the landowners who were being given some comfort through those other plans that we've put out. Not to mention the gravel extraction people, and they have had a long lead and wait for this. So anyway, yeah, it's a statement, I'm sorry. It has upset me greatly. And it's upset me greatly that these people still don't actually know the detail.
So Kevin, we'll have your question and then we'll go through to the end of the presentation. Oh, Kevin, then Andrew. And
Just on that one. When you have to go to, so with the environmental plan, you've got to go to all these stakeholders. Is it like a limited notified consent that they have to do it within a certain time frame? And can that be applied somewhere? Because on history of some of these organisations, I won't name any, but will we get things done in a timely manner? And what horsepower have we got behind making them do that?
So yes, there is a requirement for the stakeholders to comment back to us within 20 days off the top of my head.
Right. Thank you.
Andrew.
I had the same question, and the next question to that is, have we the ability or the authority to continue with our management plan if they haven't responded by that 20-day period? So in other words, they don't respond by the 20-day period, it follows on, and we are legally able to do that.
Yeah.
Okay, thank you.
Okay, so the next few slides are just some examples of our this coming year's work program in our river space. That slide is a quite extensive spraying program over the Kawerau River. Following slide, thanks, Nate. We're looking at gravel redistribution through the Kakanui. More riverbank protection around Mahino specifically, a couple of sites there that we need to deal with and target. And the next slide is just a bit of an example of when we're looking at shifting gravel around, what we're trying to achieve. So in that particular example, we've got some erosion on the outside of the bend and some gravel build up on the inside of the bend. We'll look to shift that gravel to the outside to promote the channel to sit to the inside of the bend when we can. So these are some examples. The program for this year is quite large. There's a lot of work to do. It would be fair to say that we are in a little bit of a catch-up mode in that program. But we are looking forward to quite a big year in the river space in terms of work getting done. So where we go from here, it's only a 5-year term on this particular consent. So it is relatively short term. We expect the next consents to be catchment based rather than across the whole region, which we've achieved this one. Intention there is to reflect better the outcomes more locally and within the morphology of the river and the riparian management plans. It will better align with our legislative framework that we work in. We have the ability, as we move into working through those next stages of the next consents, to surrender parts of this consent so that we can use consents on a catchment basis. And we will look to start putting these together in a relatively short order because we do know the time frame that they take. That was my last slide. I hope you take more questions.
Thank you very much. Well, look, that's good. That's great. Thank you. We do have some time for some further questions and some comments. I might start if that's all right. I know that we have not been able to meet all community expectations, and it's probably not possible for us always to meet all community expectations. But what seems important to me to ask is, does the current regime enable us to effectively carry out the required river management?
Yes, there
Right.
will be instances where we do need to apply for specific consents, but on the whole, yes.
And applying for those consents can enable us to do that work too. Right, thank you. Look, we do have time for further questions and some comments. I would, I guess, request that we don't repeat things we have already said or asked. So any new further questions or comments on this, we're happy to have. Kate.
Oh, I've now found the clause, sorry, it's clause 23. And I want to give this in context of that using gravel or having to move it. Somewhere like Pomahaka, if we thought about that. Any gravel extracted must not be used for commercial gain. And must, as far as practicable, be reused for flood protection within the same river catchment it is extracted from. Now, I've sat around the council table when we're talking about this through financial planning stages, where we had promoted the idea that if we could get an income stream from that gravel being used, that would be a good way of the work happening. And that is how I understood it would happen. So my question in this, in the Pomahaka now, if there is an area of degradation and we've got aggregation where we want to move it, on what basis would we be able to say to a contractor, take the gravel away, as opposed to, and so I'm going to come back to as opposed to taking it maybe 5 kilometres away. Maybe that's not seen as quite practicable for a site that's degraded, because that's what it's requiring us to consider.
I think I understand what you're saying, and my reading of that is that we'd be able to undertake that kind of movement of gravel over a 5K area.
Sorry, my concern is that that's exactly what we have to do rather than do it as gravel extraction for gravel use. So there's no limit to how far we may have to move it, as opposed to let gravel extract and use it.
So it also, the way that condition reads too to me is that there's a preference for reuse where that's an option, but not a requirement.
Okay. Somewhere in this process, we didn't go to a hearing to deliver what we started or initially set out to do. I understand it was done by a consensus with some parties, not with understanding of everybody who were interested in this. And that may have been the most pragmatic thing to do. I'm not being critical of that. What I'm not understanding is how, where, and why that decision was made, as instead of with no surprises. Because for some of us, we had been waiting for this, and whether, I suppose, I don't even want to go backwards looking at it. Are there any learnings that we may have preempted this in the future that would take people with this process, especially the people who've been waiting for it?
I think it's fair to say, Kate, there's a huge number of learnings out of this process. I think we can all acknowledge that. Certainly we've heard today around communication. Ultimately, the decisions were made once Tom inherited this process and was working with the team, and some of those team have moved on. The decisions were made to get us to the best possible outcome to deliver our work program. Are they the optimal outcome? No. But the process that we were constrained by led to those decisions being made to get us to the point where we have a consent and we are comfortable we can use that to discharge our duties. In terms of the feedback, I think the consenting strategy and the ability for us to have more open channels of communication between teams within the RRC, which I know is there now and will certainly benefit us as we move into the next round of consenting, and even with the stakeholders that have been involved in this process. And then the big one that you've highlighted, which we will take on board, is the community interaction through these processes, both in terms of the parties directly interested, like gravel extractors, but also just members of the community with an interest. And we've, obviously we're starting things like liaison groups, in our various areas, which will give us the ability to have those conversations. But that's been heard loud and clear, and can be picked up by the team when we start thinking about that next suite of consents. But ultimately, yes, we've learned a lot. We've got to a position based on decisions largely made by Tom and myself, to get us to a point where we can at least move forward with something.
Thanks, Richard. Andrew?
Yeah, thanks, Alan. How does this global consent compare with ECAN and Environment Southland? Particular, I suppose, things I immediately think of, the list of affected parties. Oh, sorry, the list of the affected parties, the volume of extraction, 5-year period, that sort of thing. Just approximately.
Kirsten, I might get you to pick that one up if you don't want.
Sure. I haven't delved deeply into the ECAN or ES consent or consents, but I think it's really important that we remember that they're based on the plan framework that applies. The ECAN plan framework is significantly more permissive than Otago's is. And I understand that the Environment Southland one is a lot more restrictive. So that sort of sets the environmental bottom lines that it's measured against. And so any consenting decisions those councils have made will be based around those bottom lines.
Thanks, Kirsten. I have another question, but probably for Brett. It's around the routine works that you talked about. You've got the spraying stuff, that's permitted. You've got your routine works, which is fits into your global consent category. And then I think someone said that the other work is, there's probably not a lot in that space, but I'm trying to understand how that is the case in terms of having to require additional consents to do work that doesn't fit into the first two categories. And why I asked that question is that I got the impression that there was a backlog because we've taken a permissive approach and et cetera, et cetera. So I'm just wondering that requirement to get additional consents may be a more regular, if I got that wrong.
I don't think it'll be more regular. We're consenting all the time as it is now. So we have a number of our projects that we've probably got 3 at the moment active consent applications that we're working through. Most of them in the capital space, so it's certainly not unusual if we need them in the roof space.
Thank you.
Kevin?
So for all those ones, Brett, do you go to limited notified? So they're, which I understand has got a time frame around it, or are
Depends
you?
on the consent.
Hey?
Entirely depends on the consent and the nature of the work. So Silverstream, for instance, was limited notified.
Yeah. So how often are you waiting?
So
I'm
it's
sorry,
set out,
yeah.
it's set out of there, and it might be, it's probably a good thing for us to pick up in the induction program as a sort of consenting 101, because we need to appreciate that there's different experiences in working within that resource management system, but ultimately there are decisions that can be made through the process to move things on. So you can just say, kick it to a hearing.
I realise that.
And we just go, or we continue to work with those stakeholders to try and reach an outcome where things are agreed, and therefore the process from that point forward is simpler. And that's something that any applicant has to weigh up, and we have conversations like that all the time. So there are ways to move on a process, but ultimately, we do try and work with parties to reach consensus because it does make the process smoother.
Yeah, and I'll just add, while the time from application to the consent being awarded was long, if you look at the timeline, plenty of that was us. As a team, that's where that wasn't it. The length of time taken for that consent wasn't all related to waiting for feedback, and that was largely just the latter part. So I think for working through issues was largely just the latter part of the process, and so broadly speaking, we don't spend a great deal of time waiting, and that I wouldn't use that as an excuse for how at the length of time that any of our consenting processes are taking at the moment based on that recent experience.
And could I just, on 2 pages, we had, I think it was on page 29 where we had the diagram, the hexagons, I think it was, on our key stakeholders, and then going on to page 56 where we've got the actuals, the regulatory stakeholders, I suppose. I would hope, and Richard said that we'll be dealing with all these other people at community people at the time, but we don't actually. I can't see that anywhere. So there'll be the water users, there'll be irrigation groups, there'll be the likes of the environmental groups, the Kakanui Ratepayers Improvement Society, and I wouldn't want them specifically named, but I mean, there's all those sort of groups that where do we actually, through this whole process here that's been where. And on that one there, we've got one wee box for the community, yet we've got some eel industry association that, and I'm not knocking them in any way, but I don't even see them actively in my community. So, and yet my community, and who are we actually attacking, and are we getting to the right people within communities that the right decisions are being made?
Yeah, I think Richard said it before, but we just need to get better in that space, and we will.
Alan. Yeah, Andrew.
The list of stakeholders basically is being used as affected parties. That's just my view.
Yeah.
I need to agree or disagree, but does that not set us up for, and it's probably not complete, does it not set us up for the additional consents that we require? The first thing we're going to do is expect to have, if it's limited notification, every one of those stakeholders should be advised, I imagine, because there's a set of benchmark already. I know it's an RMA question, sorry, Richard.
No, that's right.
But it's more of a question for these following consents that we will need beyond the global consent. We will be contacting that list as affected parties plus others.
So all I can talk to is recent practice, and so that wasn't the case for the Silverstream consent. There was a subset of that group.
Okay.
As a general, sorry, jump in, Alan, because I know we're running out of time, there's other questions. I think that the willingness the council is now showing to engage with these parties and the community more broadly means we're having more of these conversations, and it's enabling future processes to be a bit smoother. So not perfect, Andrew, by any means, but the relationships and the conversations between the engineering team and these groups and the community, and then the process that the regulatory teams undertake, are making things just happen a little bit simpler than perhaps they have in the past.
We'll come to you in a moment, Kate. I just want to check, are there any other final questions from other councillors? It looks as though the final question is yours, Kate.
I just want to understand what got us to the point of giving up or adding that condition 23. When I reflect on it and about gravel extraction, because what it has set us up is to look like we don't, look, I appreciate in the Silverstream with people, we want to get rid of the sediment that's been coming off there because it's a bloody pain. But there are a couple of things that I just don't understand. One is storage of gravel beside the river, which is not necessarily a bad place as long as it's not going to add to flooding. There are a couple of conditions put in there. I don't know what drove them, and it seems to set us up badly for renewals or for other ways of saying this is best practice, which it isn't necessarily. And I'm not, so I'm just understanding why we gave up what we had suggested we were going to do and allow those conditions, really.
I think the specifics, a lot of those, the decision was made some time ago. And so I can't talk to the detail, but at the same time, we've assessed what's come back to us as a consent from a workability perspective, and we think we can work with those conditions for the period that we've got the consent. And look, ultimately, the last 12 months or so have been about getting us into a position where we can get out and get some work done. And so, I've sent out a couple of work programs to a few of you, and we're going to publish those a bit more broadly in the near term. They're a lot more extensive than what you've seen in the last few years, and they fall within this consent, we just can't get out and start getting into it. But take your feedback from this meeting that we do need to do a bit more work in the community space.
Kevin has a very small question.
And just basing on Ben's statement before, we're likely to get a progress report on how this is going.
Yeah, I can come up to one towards the end of the construction
Thanks.
season.
Thank you. Staff, I'm not sure if you have any concluding comments you wish to make? No? Yes? No?
One from me, just reiterating again, appreciate there is a lot of conversations happening out in the community at the moment. I just implore that those people are connected with staff, because it is much easier for us to have those conversations directly. We will always report back to you on the outcome of those, than it is to have the conversations sort of through other people. So that's that, and we will continue to be open to engaging with all of those groups.
So look, thank you to everyone who's been involved in this workshop this afternoon. There was clearly concern when the news came through about the conditions on that consent, concern expressed from a number of councillors. And so you staff have responded by putting together a very thorough workshop where you presented those issues, and we have had time to question you quite closely about things. So look, thank you very much for everyone concerned. I will just conclude this meeting with a karakia. Ko mutu a matu mahi mo tēnei wā, mana ki tia mā mātou katoa, o mātou hoa, o mātou whānau, aio ki te aorangi. Now, work's finished for the moment. Bless us all, our colleagues, our families, and peace to the universe. Thank you very much.
Thanks.